The thunder of hooves shattered the peaceful dawn silence as Hannah Verity leveled her father's old Winchester at the approaching riders, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The small plot of land that had become her sanctuary after her father's passing was the only thing standing between her and destitution, and she'd be damned if she'd let Victor Thornton and his men take it from her without a fight. New Mexico Territory, 1879. The small town of Raton was nestled at the base of the Rocky Mountains, a place where the railroad had brought both promise and predators. Hannah had inherited her father's modest homestead just outside of town, 15 acres of hard-won land with a small cabin, a vegetable garden, and enough grazing space for her few animals. It wasn't much, but it was hers, at least according to her father's will. Victor Thornton, owner of the Double T Ranch and half the businesses in Raton, had other ideas. Hannah's finger tightened on the trigger as the 3 riders approached her fence line. She recognized Thornton's foreman, a mean-spirited man named Jenkins, flanked by 2 ranch hands whose names she didn't know. They'd come before with offers that were hardly worthy of the name, and threats when those offers were refused. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice carrying across the morning air. "This is private property." Jenkins smirked, reining his horse to a stop. "Miss Verity, Mr. Thornton's patience is wearing mighty thin. He's raised his offer to $50 for the whole parcel." "And my answer remains the same," Hannah replied, the rifle unwavering. "This land isn't for sale. Not for $50, not for $500. "You're making a mistake," Jenkins warned, his hand drifting toward his holstered pistol. A woman alone can't hope to. The crack of a rifle shot split the air, sending a spray of dirt up just inches from Jenkins' horse. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider as all eyes turned toward the source of the gunfire. A tall man astride a chestnut stallion emerged from the tree line to Hannah's right. He wore a dark hat pulled low over his eyes, a duster covered in trail dust, and had a rifle casually resting across his saddle. "The lady asked you to leave," he drawled, his voice carrying an edge of steel beneath its casual tone. "I suggest you do as she says." Jenkins' face contorted with anger. "This ain't your business, stranger." "I'm making it my business," the man replied, urging his horse forward. As he drew closer, Hannah could see his face weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble covering a strong jaw and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Name's Darius Morgan, and I don't take kindly to men threatening women." Jenkins spat on the ground. "Thornton's not going to like this." "That sounds like Thornton's problem," Darius replied. "Now ride on out of here before I decide that warning shot was too generous." For a tense moment, Hannah thought Jenkins might draw his pistol, but after a silent calculation, he wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over," he called back as the 3 men rode away. When the dust from their departure had settled, Hannah lowered her rifle and turned to face her unexpected defender. "I appreciate the assistance, Mr. Morgan, but I had things under control." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No doubt you did, madam, but 3 against 1 aren't odds I'd wish on anyone, especially when they're the kind that might shoot first and justify it later." Hannah studied him, noting the way he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "What brings you to these parts, Mr. Morgan?" "Just passing through," he said, dismounting with fluid grace. "Heading to Colorado, heard there might be work at the silver mines, and please call me Darius." "Hannah Verity," she replied, finally lowering her rifle completely. "And those men you just ran off work for Victor Thornton. He's been trying to buy my land since my father passed last winter." Darius nodded, leading his horse closer. Land disputes are common enough. What makes your property so special that this Thornton fellow won't take no for an answer?" Hannah sighed, pushing a strand of honey-brown hair back under her bonnet. "Water rights. My father chose this land because it has a reliable spring that feeds a small creek running through the property. With the drought these past 2 years, Thornton's cattle are suffering. He needs my water." "And you need it too," Darius observed, taking in her modest vegetable garden and the small flock of chickens pecking around the yard. "This land is all I have," Hannah said simply. "If I sell, I have nowhere to go, no way to support myself." Darius's gaze swept over the property, the small cabin in need of repair, the garden lovingly tended, the few head of cattle grazing in the distance. "Looks like you could use an extra hand around here," he said after a moment. Hannah's spine stiffened. "I manage just fine on my own, Mr. Morgan." He held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I've no doubt. But those men will be back, probably with reinforcements. I'm offering my help, Miss Verity. In exchange for room and board for a few days, I'll help with whatever repairs you need and keep an eye out for Thornton's men." Hannah hesitated. Her father had taught her to be wary of strangers, especially men who appeared too eager to help a woman alone. But there was something in Darius Morgan's direct gaze that spoke of honesty, and the truth was, she could use the help. "The barn has clean straw," she said finally. "You're welcome to bed down there. I can offer simple meals, nothing fancy." "That's all I ask," he replied with a nod. "I'll see to my horse, then get started on that loose board on your porch before someone trips and breaks their neck." Hannah blinked in surprise. She hadn't mentioned the porch board. "How did you notice things?" he said with a small smile. "It's kept me alive this long." As Darius led his horse toward the barn, Hannah watched him go, wondering what kind of man noticed a loose porch board from horseback, while simultaneously facing down 3 armed men. She wasn't sure if his arrival was providence or complication, but she had a feeling life on her small homestead was about to change. The next morning dawned clear and warm, promising another scorching day. Hannah rose with the sun, as was her habit, and was surprised to find smoke already rising from the outdoor cookfire. Darius had beaten her to wakefulness and was tending a pot of coffee, his hat resting on the bench beside him. "Hope you don't mind," he said as she approached. "Figured I'd get an early start." "Not at all," she replied, noticing he'd already gathered eggs from the henhouse. "You didn't have to do that," he shrugged. "Fair trade for your hospitality." They shared a simple breakfast of eggs and the last of Hannah's cornbread, and she found herself studying him in the morning light. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably no more than 30, with flecks of gray just beginning to show at his temples. His hands were calloused from work, but he ate with unexpected manners, suggesting an upbringing that hadn't been entirely rough. "What's your story, Mr. Morgan?" she asked finally. "You don't strike me as a drifter, despite your current circumstances." Darius took his time answering, sipping his coffee thoughtfully. "I was a rancher once, down in the Texas Panhandle, had a small spread, nothing fancy, but it was mine." "What happened?" A shadow crossed his face. "War happened. I joined up with the Confederacy, not because I believed in their cause particularly, but because Texas seceded and that's where my loyalty lay. When I came back 4 years later, everything was gone. House burned, cattle stolen or scattered." Hannah nodded slowly. The war had ended 14 years ago, but its echoes still reverberated across the country. "I'm sorry. Life goes on," he said with a shrug. "I've been working where I can since then. Ranch hand, cattle drive, even tried my hand at prospecting for a while. Nothing stuck. And now Colorado. Heard there's good money in the mines, and I'm not afraid of hard work." He set his empty cup down. "What about you, Miss Verity? How did you end up defending this homestead alone?" Hannah looked out over her land, feeling the familiar mix of pride and melancholy that always accompanied thoughts of her father. "My mother died when I was 12. Consumption. After that, it was just me and my father. He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching, shooting, surviving out here." "He taught you well," Darius observed. "He had no sons, so he raised me to be self-sufficient," she continued. "When he died last winter, some folks in town expected me to sell right away, maybe find a husband to take care of me." A trace of bitterness crept into her voice. "As if I couldn't take care of myself." "Clearly they underestimated you," Darius said with a smile that momentarily softened his weather-beaten features. Hannah returned his smile. "This land was my father's dream. He worked himself to the bone to keep it. I won't dishonor his memory by giving it up without a fight." "Then we'd better make sure you're ready for one," Darius said, rising to his feet. "I noticed your fence line could use reinforcing on the north side. After that, I thought I might take a look at your barn door. It's hanging a bit loose on its hinges." Hannah felt a rush of gratitude. "You don't have to, I know," he interrupted gently. "But I'd like to. You feed me, I fix things. Seems fair." As promised, Darius spent the day making repairs around the property. Hannah worked alongside him when she could, between tending her garden and caring for her small herd of cattle. By sundown, the loose porch board had been replaced, the fence reinforced, and the barn door rehung properly. They shared another simple meal as the stars appeared overhead, and Hannah found herself enjoying his quiet company. Darius wasn't a man of many words, but when he did speak, it was with thought and purpose. He told her stories of his travels that made her laugh, describing characters he'd met along the trail with a wry humor that suggested he saw the world clearly, with all its follies and virtues. 3 days passed in similar fashion. Each morning, Hannah expected Darius to announce his departure, to continue his journey to Colorado, but each day he found more work to do around her homestead. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together during the daylight hours and sharing quiet conversation in the evenings. On the 4th day, Hannah returned from checking her cattle to find Darius deep in conversation with a man she recognized as Sheriff Tom Wilson from Raton. "Miss Verity," the sheriff greeted her, touching the brim of his hat. "I was just telling Mr. Morgan here that Thornton's been making noise in town about you harboring a dangerous drifter on your property." Hannah's jaw tightened. "Mr. Morgan is a guest helping with some repairs, Sheriff." "There's no law against that." "No, madam, there isn't," Wilson agreed. "But Thornton's got influence in these parts. He's claiming Morgan here threatened his men without provocation." "That's not how it happened," Hannah protested. "I didn't figure it was," the sheriff replied. "Just thought you both should know what's being said. Thornton's not a man who gives up easily when he wants something." Darius stepped forward. "Sheriff, have there been any wanted posters come through recently with my description or name?" Wilson studied him for a moment before shaking his head. "Can't say there have, I'd remember." "Then legally I have every right to be here at Miss Verity's invitation," Darius stated firmly. "That you do," Wilson agreed. "Just watch yourselves. Thornton plays by his own rules sometimes." He tipped his hat again. "Good day to you both." After the sheriff rode away, Hannah turned to Darius, concern etching lines in her forehead. "You don't need this trouble. Perhaps it would be better if you continued on to Colorado." Darius's expression hardened. "Is that what you want, Miss Verity?" Hannah hesitated. The truth was, she'd grown accustomed to his presence, to having someone to share the burden of the homestead, someone to talk to in the evening quiet. More than that, she'd begun to admire his quiet strength, his integrity, his willingness to stand beside her against Thornton's intimidation. "No," she admitted softly, "but I don't want to be the cause of difficulty for you either." "I've faced worse than Victor Thornton," Darius said with a grim smile, "and I don't make a habit of leaving unfinished business." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and purples, Hannah found herself studying Darius's profile. In just a few days, he'd become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Darius," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Why have you stayed?" "Really?" He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "At first, it was because I saw someone standing alone against odds that weren't fair. I've been in that position myself, and no one stood with me then." Hannah nodded, understanding. "But now," he continued, his voice growing softer, "now I stay because I admire your courage, your determination, the way you face each day with purpose, defending what's yours without complaint or self-pity." A warmth that had nothing to do with the summer evening spread through Hannah's chest. "I've been drifting a long time," Darius added. "It's been years since I felt any place was worth stopping for." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits finding unexpected connection in the vast loneliness of the frontier. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Darius was on his feet in an instant, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. Hannah rose beside him, peering into the gathering dusk. 5 riders approached the homestead, and even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the broad-shouldered figure at their head. Victor Thornton had decided to pay a visit himself. "Stay behind me," Darius murmured, but Hannah moved forward to stand at his side. "This is my land," she said quietly. "We face them together." Thornton reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the yard, his eyes taking in the sight of Hannah and Darius standing shoulder to shoulder on the porch. He was a large man in his 50s, with a thick beard streaked with gray and the prosperous look of someone used to getting his way. "Miss Verity," he called out, his voice booming in the evening quiet. "I see the rumors are true. You've taken in a stray." "Mr. Thornton," Hannah acknowledged coolly. "What brings you to my property at this hour?" Thornton dismounted, his boots raising small puffs of dust as he approached. His men remained mounted, watching with hands hovering near their weapons. "Thought it was time we spoke directly," Thornton said. "No intermediaries. I want to make you a final offer for this land." "My answer hasn't changed," Hannah replied. "The land isn't for sale." Thornton's gaze shifted to Darius. "And who might you be, stranger, to involve yourself in private business matters?" "Darius Morgan," he answered simply. "Miss Verity's friend." "Friend," Thornton repeated with a skeptical laugh. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" "Whatever he's told you, Miss Verity, a drifter like him will be gone with the next wind. Meanwhile, my offer still stands. $100 for the property. That's more than generous." "It's less than half what it's worth, and you know it," Hannah countered. Thornton's expression hardened. "What it's worth is what someone's willing to pay for it, and right now, I'm the only buyer." "Then I guess it's not for sale," Darius interjected. Thornton stepped closer, his bulk intimidating in the fading light. "You do well to stay out of this, Morgan. I run this county. One word from me, and you'll find there's no place for you here, not in Raton, not in all of New Mexico territory." Darius didn't flinch. Fortunately, it's a big country. For a tense moment, Hannah feared Thornton might order his men to attack. But instead he turned back to her, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Think carefully, Miss Verity. A woman alone has many vulnerabilities in these parts. Accidents happen. Fires start. Cattle go missing. It would be a shame if your stubbornness led to misfortune." Hannah felt her blood run cold at the thinly veiled threat, but she kept her voice steady. "That sounded remarkably like a threat, Mr. Thornton. I wonder if Sheriff Wilson would take an interest in hearing about it." "Sheriff Wilson works for me, same as half the town," Thornton replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sleep on it, Miss Verity. I'll send Jenkins for your answer tomorrow." With that, he returned to his horse and mounted up. "Good evening to you both." As the riders departed, Hannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That man is used to getting what he wants," she said. "So are you," Darius observed with a small smile. "The difference is you're willing to work for it. He just takes." They retreated inside the cabin as darkness fell completely, the lamplight casting warm shadows across the simple furnishings. Hannah busied herself making tea, her hands trembling slightly from the confrontation. "He'll make good on those threats," she said quietly. "He's not a man who bluffs." Darius nodded, his expression grave. "I figured as much, which means we need to be prepared." Hannah asked, looking up at him. His eyes met hers steadily. "Yes, unless you'd prefer I leave." "No," she said quickly, then more softly, "no, I don't want you to leave." Something shifted in his gaze, a softening. "Then I'll stay, for as long as you need me." Hannah realized with sudden clarity that what had begun as temporary assistance had become something else entirely. Darius Morgan had come into her life like an unexpected storm, changing the landscape of her existence in ways she was only beginning to understand. That night, Hannah lay awake long after retiring to her small bedroom, her mind racing with thoughts of Thornton's threats and, more confusingly, of Darius. She'd been alone for so long, had convinced herself that solitude was preferable to dependence on anyone else. Yet in just a few days, this quiet, steady man had begun to dismantle the walls she'd built around her heart since her father's death. Morning came too quickly after a night of restless sleep. Hannah rose with the sun as always, but found the cabin empty. Concerned, she stepped onto the porch, scanning the property for any sign of Darius. Relief washed over her when she spotted him returning from the direction of the creek, his clothes damp, suggesting he'd bathed in the cool water. "Good morning," he called, raising a hand in greeting. "Hope you don't mind, but I thought I'd catch some fish for breakfast." Indeed, he carried a string of 3 good-sized trout. Hannah smiled, touched by the gesture. "That's more than I've managed to catch all summer," he grinned, his smile transforming his usually serious face. "Lucky hands today, I guess." They prepared the fish together, working side by side in comfortable silence. As they ate, Darius outlined his thoughts on protecting the property from Thornton's inevitable retribution. "First, we should move your cattle closer to the house," he suggested. "Makes them harder to rustle. Second, we need to keep watch in shifts. If they come at night, they'll expect the place to be sleeping." Hannah nodded, impressed by his strategic thinking. "What about the water? That's what Thornton really wants." "He could try to divert the creek upstream from my property." "Good point," Darius agreed. "I'll ride up today and check. Might be able to set up some early warning if they try anything there." As he spoke, Hannah was struck again by his commitment to helping her. "Darius," she said hesitantly, "why are you doing all this? You could be halfway to Colorado by now looking for work in those silver mines." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "You know, I've been asking myself the same question." He set down his fork and looked at her directly. "The truth is, Miss Verity, Hannah, this is the first time in years I've felt like I was doing something that mattered, standing for something right instead of just surviving day to day." His honesty touched her deeply. "And the silver mines? They'll still be there if I decide to go," he said with a small shrug. "But right now, this feels more important." Their eyes met, and Hannah felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the danger they faced. Before she could respond, the sound of an approaching horse drew their attention. Darius was on his feet instantly, hand on his pistol. But when the rider came into view, it was Sheriff Wilson, alone this time and looking troubled. "Miss Verity, Mr. Morgan," he greeted them, dismounting. "Thought I should ride out and warn you. Thornton's been in town all morning, hiring men rough sorts I don't recognize." Hannah's stomach tightened with dread. "When does he plan to move against us?" The sheriff shook his head. "Don't know for certain. But he's offering good money, and men talk when they drink. Sounds like he might be planning something for tonight." Darius stepped forward. "Sheriff, you know what he's planning isn't legal. Can't you stop him?" Wilson sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his thinning hair. "Truth is, Thornton owns half the businesses in Raton, including the bank that holds the mortgage on my house. I've got a wife and 3 children to consider." "So you'll stand by while he steals my land?" Hannah asked, her voice rising with indignation. "I didn't say that," Wilson replied, his expression pained. "I'm here, aren't I, warning you, and I brought these." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a box of ammunition. "Figured you might be running low." Hannah's anger deflated slightly. "Thank you, Sheriff." "It's not much," Wilson admitted, "but it's what I can do without risking my family." He replaced his hat. "I'd suggest you both consider leaving before nightfall. Thornton means business this time." After the sheriff departed, Hannah and Darius exchanged a determined look. "I'm not running," she said firmly. "Didn't figure you would," Darius replied with a nod. "Then we prepare." They spent the rest of the day fortifying the homestead as best they could. Darius helped Hannah move her small herd of cattle to the pasture nearest the house. Then they worked together to barricade windows, stockpile water in case the well was compromised, and position weapons at strategic points throughout the cabin. By late afternoon, dark clouds had begun to gather on the horizon, promising a summer thunderstorm. Hannah stood on the porch, watching the distant lightning, a strange calm settling over her despite the danger she knew was coming. Darius joined her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. "Storm's coming," he observed. "Might work to our advantage. Rain makes for poor shooting conditions." Hannah nodded, then turned to face him fully. "Darius, if you want to leave, I would understand. This isn't your fight." He studied her face for a long moment, his gray eyes intense. "Do you want me to leave, Hannah?" "No," she admitted softly. "But I don't want you hurt because of me either." Darius took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "In 4 years of war and 14 years of drifting, I've never found something worth fighting for like this. Worth staying for." Hannah's breath caught as he reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I think maybe I was heading toward you all this time without knowing it," he continued, his voice low. "So no, I won't leave. Not unless you ask me to." The intensity in his eyes made her heart race. Without thinking, Hannah closed the distance between them, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Darius remained still, as if shocked by her boldness. Then his arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as he returned her kiss with a tenderness that made her knees weak. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day I rode onto your land," he confessed. Hannah smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm glad you finally did." The moment was broken by the distant sound of thunder, closer now as the storm approached. With reluctance, they drew apart, both aware that the coming night would bring dangers beyond the weather. "We should finish preparing," Hannah said softly. Darius nodded, though his eyes lingered on her face as if memorizing her features. "Stay close to me tonight," he said, his voice serious again. "Whatever happens." As darkness fell, the storm arrived in full force, rain lashing against the cabin's roof and windows. Hannah and Darius kept watch from different windows, vigilant for any sign of Thornton's men approaching through the downpour. This rain might delay them. Hannah observed hopefully as lightning illuminated the yard in brief, ghostly flashes. "Maybe," Darius agreed, though his expression remained watchful. "Or they might use it as cover." Around midnight, the rain began to ease, the thunder moving off to the east. In the sudden quiet, Hannah heard what Darius had already noticed: the soft splashing of horses moving through mud, approaching from the north side of the property. "They're here," he whispered, moving to position himself at the window with the best view of the approaching riders. "I count at least 6 men." Hannah's heart pounded as she took up her rifle, joining him at the window. Through the gloom, she could make out dark shapes moving toward the cabin. A flash of lightning revealed Jenkins at the lead, with 5 unfamiliar men behind him. "No sign of Thornton," Darius observed, sending his men to do his dirty work. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the cabin. Jenkins's voice carried through the night air. "Miss Verity, we know you're in there. Mr. Thornton has decided to claim this land for unpaid taxes. You have 5 minutes to gather your belongings and leave peacefully." "Unpaid taxes?" Hannah whispered incredulously. "That's a lie. I paid them myself last month." "He's just looking for justification," Darius replied grimly. "Do you want me to answer or will you?" Hannah stepped to the door, opening it just enough to call out, "My taxes are paid in full, Jenkins. I have the receipt to prove it. Now get off my land before I'm forced to defend it." A burst of mocking laughter came from the men. A woman and a drifter against 6 armed men. Jenkins called back, "Be reasonable, Miss Verity. No one needs to get hurt tonight." Darius moved to stand behind Hannah, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Your choice," he said quietly. "We can try to reason with them, or we can show them we mean business." Hannah took a deep breath, feeling the solid presence of Darius at her back. "My father always said you can't reason with a rattlesnake," she replied. "You can only make it clear that striking would be a mistake." With that, she raised her rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. "That's my answer, Jenkins," she called out. "The next shot won't be a warning." For a tense moment, silence fell over the homestead. Then Jenkins's voice came again, harder now. "Have it your way. Boys, burn them out." 2 of the men dismounted, carrying what appeared to be torches. Despite the recent rain, Hannah knew the wooden cabin would catch eventually if they managed to set it alight. "Take the one on the left," Darius murmured, raising his own rifle. "I'll take the right." They fired almost simultaneously. Hannah's shot kicked up mud at the feet of her target, causing him to stumble and drop his torch into a puddle. Darius's shot was more precise, grazing the arm of the second man, who cursed loudly and retreated to his horse. The remaining men drew their weapons, firing wildly at the cabin. Hannah and Darius ducked as bullets splintered wood and shattered a window. "We need to split up," Darius said quickly. "I'll draw their fire toward the front while you slip out the back and circle around. Take position in the barn. You'll have a clear shot from there if they try to approach the cabin again." Hannah nodded, heart racing. "Be careful," she whispered, impulsively leaning forward to press a quick kiss to his lips. "Always," he promised, his eyes intense in the darkness. As planned, Darius laid down, covering fire from the front windows while Hannah slipped out the back door, staying low as she made her way through the rain-soaked yard to the barn. Once inside, she climbed to the hayloft and positioned herself at a small window that overlooked the cabin and yard. From her elevated position, she could see Thornton's men spreading out, trying to surround the cabin. They clearly believed both Hannah and Darius were still inside. She took careful aim at Jenkins, who was directing the others from the cover of a large oak tree. Her shot missed him but splintered bark near his head, causing him to dive for better cover. The confusion her unexpected fire caused gave Darius the opportunity to pick off another of Thornton's men, hitting him in the shoulder and effectively taking him out of the fight. The remaining men began to falter, clearly having expected an easy victory against a lone woman, not an organized defense with fire coming from multiple directions. Hannah heard Jenkins cursing, trying to rally his men for another assault. Then, to her horror, she saw one man break away from the group, circling toward the barn with a lit torch in hand. He hadn't spotted her in the hayloft, but his intentions were clear. If they couldn't burn the cabin, they would burn the barn instead. Hannah took aim, her hands steady despite her fear. She fired, and the man stumbled, dropping the torch as he clutched his leg where her bullet had found its mark. He dragged himself back toward his companions, leaving the torch sputtering in the mud. The standoff continued for what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, with sporadic gunfire exchanged from both sides. Finally, Hannah heard Jenkins call out, "Fall back! This isn't working!" Through the pre-dawn gloom, she watched as Thornton's men retreated, carrying their wounded. Jenkins turned in his saddle for one last look at the cabin. "This isn't over," he shouted before spurring his horse away. Hannah waited until they were well out of sight before making her way back to the cabin. She found Darius reloading his rifle, a grim satisfaction on his face. "They're gone for now," he said as she entered. "But Jenkins is right, it's not over. They'll be back, probably with more men." Hannah nodded, the reality of their situation sinking in. "What do we do?" Darius set his rifle aside and approached her, his eyes serious. "I have an idea, but you might not like it." "Tell me," she insisted. "We need to take the fight to Thornton," he explained. "Right now, he's comfortable in town, sending his men to do his dirty work. We need to make this personal for him, make him understand that his actions have consequences." Hannah frowned. "You're not suggesting we hurt him?" "No," Darius said quickly. "I'm suggesting we expose him. Sheriff Wilson may be under Thornton's thumb, but there must be a territorial marshal or judge who would take interest in a case of attempted land theft and assault." "The nearest marshal is in Santa Fe," Hannah said thoughtfully. "It would take days to reach him and return." "Then we need to hold out until we can get word to him," Darius replied. "But first, I think a visit to town is in order." Thornton has been operating in shadows, using threats and intimidation. Time to bring his actions into the light. The plan they formulated was risky but potentially effective. As dawn broke over the homestead, they prepared to ride to Raton not as fugitives, but as citizens demanding justice. Darius insisted that Hannah wear her father's old duster and hat as disguise, concerned that Thornton's men might try to stop her before they reached town. They rode side by side, alert for any sign of ambush, but the trail remained clear. The town of Raton was just waking as they arrived, shopkeepers opening their establishments and early risers heading to the cafe for breakfast. Darius led the way to the newspaper office, where the Raton Chronicle was produced weekly by its editor, a bespectacled man named Howard Phillips. Phillips was sweeping the front step when they approached. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, eyeing them curiously. "I hope so," Darius replied, dismounting. "We'd like to place an announcement in your next edition." Inside the small office, Hannah revealed herself, removing the hat and duster. Phillips's eyes widened in recognition. "Miss Verity, we'd heard rumors about trouble out at your place. Thornton's been saying you refused a generous offer and hired a gunman to threaten his men." "That's not even close to the truth," Hannah replied firmly. "Last night, Thornton's men tried to burn us out of my home, claiming false tax delinquency as justification. Phillips looked troubled. That's a serious accusation against a prominent citizen. It's the truth, Darius said, and we want it printed. Thornton owns the bank that holds the mortgage on this building, Phillips said hesitantly. I could lose everything. Hannah leaned forward. Mr. Phillips, how many other people in Raton live in fear of Victor Thornton? How many businesses operate at his whim? This isn't just about my land, it's about whether this town belongs to its citizens or to one man. Her words seemed to strike a chord with the editor. What exactly did you want to announce? He asked after a moment. A public meeting, Darius explained. Tonight at the town hall. We're going to present evidence of Thornton's illegal activities and announce our intention to bring in the territorial marshal to investigate. Phillips removed his spectacles, polishing them nervously. He won't take this lying down, you know. We're counting on it, Darius replied with a grim smile. Their next stop was the telegraph office, where Darius sent an urgent message to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe, detailing the situation and requesting immediate intervention. The operator promised to send it right away, though he warned it might be days before the marshal could respond or arrive. As they crossed the street toward the sheriff's office, Hannah spotted Jenkins emerging from the saloon. He saw them at the same moment, his hand moving to his pistol before he noticed the crowded street around them. Keep walking, Darius murmured, his hand finding the small of Hannah's back to guide her. He won't try anything in broad daylight with witnesses. Jenkins watched them with naked hatred but made no move to follow as they entered the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wilson looked up from his desk, surprise and concern crossing his face. Miss Verity, Mr. Morgan, I didn't expect to see you in town after last night. You know what happened then, Hannah said, not a question. Wilson nodded wearily. Jenkins came back with 3 wounded men, claiming you fired on them without provocation. That's a lie, Darius stated flatly. They came to burn us out, claiming false tax delinquency. The sheriff sighed, rubbing his forehead. What do you want from me? I warned you what would happen. We want you to do your job, Hannah replied, her voice steady. We're holding a town meeting tonight to expose what Thornton has been doing. I expect you to be there, Sheriff, and I expect you to maintain order. Wilson looked between them, conflict evident in his expression. Thornton won't let this stand. That's his problem, Darius said. The question is, which side of this are you on, Sheriff? The law or Victor Thornton? Leaving the troubled sheriff to his thoughts, Hannah and Darius completed their circuit of the town, stopping at several businesses to personally invite the owners to the meeting. Many seemed reluctant, fearful of Thornton's reaction, but the seed had been planted. By midday, word of the meeting had spread throughout Raton. Hannah and Darius took their lunch at the small cafe, aware of the curious and sometimes hostile glances from other patrons. People are afraid, Hannah observed quietly. Fear can be powerful, Darius agreed, but so can hope. If enough people stand together, Thornton's influence weakens. Their meal was interrupted when the cafe door banged open and Victor Thornton himself entered, flanked by Jenkins and another man. The room fell silent as Thornton approached their table. Miss Verity, he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. I'm surprised to find you in town today. I'd heard there was some unfortunate business at your homestead last night. Unfortunate indeed, Hannah replied coolly. Your men attempted to burn me out of my home based on false claims of tax delinquency. Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. A misunderstanding, I'm sure. Jenkins was overzealous in his approach. Rest assured, he's been reprimanded. Save your lies for someone who might believe them, Darius interjected. We've already sent for the territorial marshal. He'll be very interested in last night's events, not to mention your history of land grabbing in the area." Thornton's facade of geniality cracked slightly. "You're making a grave mistake, both of you. I built this town. There isn't a business here that doesn't depend on me in some way." "Perhaps it's time that changed," Hannah said, meeting his gaze steadily. Thornton leaned forward, dropping his voice to a menacing whisper. "Cancel your little meeting, Miss Verity. Take your drifter and leave the territory. That's your last chance to walk away from this intact." Hannah felt Darius tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm, keeping her eyes on Thornton. "We'll see you at the town hall this evening, Mr. Thornton. I do hope you'll attend. After all, you're the guest of honor." Thornton's face darkened with anger, but he was conscious of the many witnesses watching their exchange. With a curt nod, he straightened. "Jenkins, we're leaving." At the door, he turned back. "Consider carefully what's at stake here." After Thornton's departure, the cafe slowly resumed its normal buzz of conversation, though many eyes remained fixed on Hannah and Darius. "That was bold," Darius said softly, admiration in his voice. "My father always said courage isn't about not being afraid," Hannah replied. "It's about being afraid and doing what's right anyway." As evening approached, Hannah and Darius made final preparations at the town hall, a modest building that served as Raton's center for civic matters. They had arranged chairs in rows, facing a small raised platform where Hannah would present her case against Thornton. "Are you nervous?" Darius asked as they surveyed the empty room. "Terrified," Hannah admitted, "but also determined. One way or another, this ends tonight." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The town hall began to fill as 7 o'clock approached. To Hannah's surprise and relief, many more people came than she had dared hope. Shopkeepers, ranchers from neighboring properties, miners, and ordinary citizens of Raton. Sheriff Wilson arrived, taking a position at the back of the room, his expression troubled but resolved. At precisely 7, Hannah stepped onto the platform, Darius at her side. The room quieted as she began to speak, her clear voice carrying to the farthest corners. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. "Many of you know me as Jonathan Verity's daughter, a man who worked honestly for everything he had. When he died last winter, I inherited his small homestead outside of town, 15 acres with a reliable spring that provides water even in the driest seasons." She paused, scanning the room. "What you may not know is that since my father's death, Victor Thornton has been attempting to force me off my land. First with insultingly low offers, then with threats, and finally, last night, with violence." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hannah continued, detailing the events of the previous night, Thornton's false claims about tax delinquency, and the attempt to burn her cabin. "I stand before you not just to tell my story," she said, her voice growing stronger, "but to ask how many of you have felt Thornton's hand around your throats. How many have been forced to sell land or businesses at a fraction of their worth? How many live in fear of crossing him?" The room was silent, tense. Then, from the middle of the crowd, a man stood up. Hannah recognized him as Sam Davis, the blacksmith. 3 years ago, Thornton threatened to redirect all ranch business away from my forge unless I sold him the adjacent lot at half its value, Davis said, his deep voice resonant in the quiet room. "I had no choice if I wanted to feed my family." His testimony broke the dam. One by one, other citizens rose to tell their stories, a shopkeeper forced to extend credit to Thornton indefinitely, a rancher whose cattle mysteriously died after he refused to sell grazing rights, a widow whose late husband's debts were suddenly discovered by Thornton's bank, forcing her to sell her home. The pattern was clear. and the collective anger in the room palpable. As the testimonies continued, the door to the town hall swung open, and Victor Thornton strode in, accompanied by Jenkins and several other men. The room fell silent as he walked down the center aisle. "Is this your idea of justice, Miss Verity?" he called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "A kangaroo court of malcontents and failed businessmen, people who couldn't compete in a changing world and want someone to blame." He turned to address the crowd. "Everything I've done has been within the bounds of the law. I've built Raton from a dusty stopping point to a growing town. The railroad came here because of my influence. Jobs exist because of my investments. And people suffer because of your greed," Darius countered, stepping forward. "The law you claim to respect doesn't include forcing people from their homes with false claims and violence." Thornton's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to judge me, drifter? A man with no roots, no stake in this community. You'll be gone with the next wind, leaving these good people with the consequences of your troublemaking." Hannah moved to stand beside Darius. "Mr. Morgan has shown more integrity in the week I've known him than you have in all your years in Raton. He stood with me when no one else would. And now we're asking everyone here to stand with us not just for my land, but for their own right to live without fear." The tension in the room was palpable as citizens looked between Hannah and Thornton, weighing decades of intimidation against the hope of change. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward from the back of the room. "I received a telegraph response this afternoon," he announced, his voice carrying authority. "The territorial marshal will arrive tomorrow to investigate the claims against Mr. Thornton. Until then, I am placing Jenkins under arrest for the attempted arson of Miss Verity's property." Thornton's face contorted with fury. "You can't do that. I own you, Wilson." "Not anymore," the sheriff replied quietly, drawing his pistol. "Jenkins, surrender your weapon and come with me." Jenkins looked to Thornton for direction, his hand hovering near his holster. The room held its collective breath. "Don't be a fool," Thornton hissed at Jenkins. "There are too many witnesses." With visible reluctance, Jenkins removed his gun belt and allowed the sheriff to escort him out. Thornton turned back to face Hannah and Darius, his voice low with menace. "This isn't over. The marshal will find no evidence. It will be your word against mine, and I have friends in Santa Fe as well." "Perhaps," Darius acknowledged. "But how many friends will you have left when the full extent of your dealings comes to light? The marshal won't just be investigating last night's attack. He'll be looking into every testimony we heard tonight." Thornton's confidence faltered visibly as he looked around the room, seeing determination where once there had been fear. Without another word, he turned and strode out, his remaining men following in his wake. As the door closed behind them, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the crowd. People surged forward to congratulate Hannah and Darius, to share their own stories, to offer support for the coming investigation. In the midst of the celebration, Hannah found Darius's hand and squeezed it tightly. "We did it," she whispered. "We've begun," he corrected gently. "Thornton won't give up easily," she nodded, sobered by his reminder. "Will you stay? Until this is truly over." His eyes, warm and steady on hers, held a promise that made her heart race. "I'll stay as long as you want me to, Hannah, and perhaps longer if you'll have me." The territorial marshal, a stern man named Robert Callahan, arrived the next day as promised. He took statements from Hannah, Darius, and numerous townspeople, examining evidence of the attack on the homestead, and the pattern of intimidation Thornton had established over the years. Within a week, charges had been filed against Thornton for conspiracy to commit arson, fraud, and intimidation. Jenkins and 2 other men were charged as accomplices. The evidence, once compiled, was overwhelming, particularly when Thornton's own bookkeeper came forward with records of questionable transactions designed to force landowners into debt. As news of Thornton's arrest spread, the atmosphere in Raton began to change. People walked more freely, spoke more openly. Businesses that had operated under Thornton's thumb began to assert their independence. The bank was temporarily placed under the management of a federal receiver until a new owner could be found. Through it all, Darius remained at Hannah's side. Together they rebuilt the damaged sections of her cabin, tended the crops, and cared for the animals. What had begun as a temporary arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated but both had come to treasure. One evening, as summer gave way to early autumn, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson. Hannah's head rested comfortably on Darius's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "I received a letter from Marshal Callahan today," she said quietly. "Thornton's trial has been scheduled for next month in Santa Fe. We'll both need to testify." Darius nodded. "I expected as much. It will be good to see this through to the end." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft whisper of wind through the grass. Hannah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since, before her father's death, perhaps not even then. The land she had fought so hard to keep had become more than just a homestead. With Darius, it had become a home. "You know," Darius said thoughtfully, "those silver mines in Colorado will have to manage without me." Hannah lifted her head to look at him, a smile playing at her lips. "Is that so?" He met her gaze, his gray eyes serious despite his light tone. "I've been thinking about putting down roots. This seems like a good place to start." Hannah's heart quickened. "The land needs a lot of work. The cabin could use expanding and the herd is small." "Good thing I'm not afraid of hard work," he replied, taking her hand in his. "Hannah, when I rode onto your land that day, I was just passing through. I had no plans, no destination that meant anything. But finding you, watching you stand alone against impossible odds, it woke something in me I thought had died in the war." He paused, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I love you, Hannah Verity. I love your courage, your determination, your heart. If you'll have me, I'd like to build a life here with you." Tears sprang to Hannah's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too, Darius Morgan. And yes, I'll have you today, tomorrow, for all the days to come." Their lips met in a tender kiss, as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land that had brought them together, land that had been worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth loving for. The trial of Victor Thornton became something of a sensation in the New Mexico territory. Hannah and Darius traveled to Santa Fe together, both testifying to the events that had transpired in Raton. They were joined by a parade of witnesses, townspeople, who had finally found the courage to speak out against years of intimidation and exploitation. Thornton's conviction was swift, his sentence severe: 15 years in territorial prison for his crimes. Jenkins and the others received lesser sentences for their roles. As Hannah and Darius left the courthouse hand in hand, there was a sense of a chapter closing, justice having been served. They were married in Raton 2 weeks after returning from Santa Fe, a small ceremony attended by many of the townspeople who had stood with them against Thornton. Sheriff Wilson, who had found his courage when it mattered most, gave Hannah away in her father's absence. With the money Darius had saved from years of drifting work, supplemented by a small inheritance Hannah had received from her father, they expanded the cabin into a proper ranch house. They added a second bedroom, a larger kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around the front of the house, a place to watch the sunsets together as the years passed. The small herd grew, as Darius applied the ranching knowledge he had gained in Texas. They purchased additional land adjacent to the original homestead when it became available, expanding their operation while always maintaining the crucial spring and creek that had been the source of so much conflict. Their first child, a son they named Jonathan after Hannah's father, was born a year after their marriage. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth. The children grew strong in the clear mountain air, learning the value of hard work and the importance of standing for what was right, even against overwhelming odds. As the years passed, Raton prospered without Thornton's oppressive influence. New businesses opened, the railroad brought trade and travelers, and the town developed a reputation for fairness and opportunity. Hannah and Darius were respected members of the community, their story becoming something of a local legend: the woman who wouldn't back down, and the drifter who found his home in her courage. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Darius surprised Hannah with a special gift: a small silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children. Inside, he had engraved a simple message: "For the woman who taught me what was worth fighting for." "I never thought I'd find this," Hannah said that night as they sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. "A love that feels like coming home." Darius pulled her close, his arms as strong and sure as they had been that first day when he faced down Thornton's men. "I spent years wandering, looking for something I couldn't name," he replied. "The moment I saw you standing your ground, rifle in hand, I knew I'd found it." And as their children slept peacefully inside the home they had built together, Hannah and Darius Morgan watched over the land they had defended, land that had brought them together and given them a future neither could have imagined. On that fateful day, when a drifter found a woman defending her small plot, and decided, against all odds and expectations, to stand beside her and never leave.